Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Sonika Jowry, our Senior Application Scientist, is going to present, and along with Mingyu Kang is going to do the translation. And so welcome, and we'll be taking pauses in between slides so that you can ask questions. So feel free to ask questions or put a note in the chat, whatever you're more comfortable with. So Sonika, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Denise. So hi, everyone. As Denise said, my name is Sonika Jowry, and I'm a Senior Quantum Applications Researcher at IonQ. Today, we will have a session on machine learning on IonQ systems. We will begin with a talk and follow up with a hands-on tutorial. Also, I want to say, at any point, please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. I think we'll take them after every few slides. So let's begin. Recently, several examples of machine learning have been demonstrated on IonQ quantum systems. For instance, in this first paper on the left over here, we've designed a quantum nearest centroid classifier using techniques for efficiently loading classical data into quantum states and performing distance estimations. We experimentally demonstrated this on an 11-qubit trapped ion quantum machine, matching the accuracy of classical nearest centroid classifiers for real-life image data sets. In another paper, the one on the bottom over here, we also demonstrated generative learning, where the goal is to construct probabilistic models aiming to capture the most essential features of complex data and to generate similar data by sampling from the trained model distribution. For instance, in this paper, we demonstrated the first practical and experimental implementation of a quantum classical generative algorithm capable of generating high-resolution handwritten digits with an ion-trap quantum computer. In this talk, I will mainly focus on describing the image classification experiment in detail. I should mention, of course, that this image classification work was joint work done with our partner QCware. So image classification, as you all know, has many applications in real life, whether it is correctly identifying people on Facebook or differentiating between, let's say, cats and dogs, or more serious applications like identifying tumors in MRI images on the right here. Image classification is found everywhere in today's technology. In this talk, we will see how IonQ systems were used to classify two real-life data sets. The first one being the iris data set, which is shown over here, which consists of characteristics of the different species of the iris flower. The second one is the MNIST data set, which consists of images of handwritten digits. So when we decide to do any machine learning task, the first thing to do is to pick an algorithm. So here we chose a really simple algorithm called the nearest centroid classifier. In this method, the model is constructed by finding the centroids of each class of training data. For instance, if you have three classes as shown by the different colors on the right over here, their centroids can be located by averaging over the positions of each point in the class. Then, when you have to predict the label of a new data point, you can simply calculate the distance to each centroid and then assign the class for which the distance is the shortest. In this case, we will compute the distance on the quantum computer and thus make this into a quantum nearest centroid algorithm. So to compute the distances between 2 points on a quantum computer, we designed a distance estimator circuit. The first half of the circuit, which is shown on the right over here, the first half of the circuit consists of a sequence of gates, which effectively loads a data point X. And the second half consists of applying the loader for the data point Y in reverse. Then if you work through the math, the probability of the first qubit being in 1 gives the dot product between the vectors X and Y. The attractive properties of this circuit are that it is quite shallow. So it is logarithmic in the dimension of each data point. And if there are n qubits, it is only of 2 log n depth. Okay, if there are no questions, we can proceed. So after designing the algorithm, we decided to run it on the IonQ machines. So first, some details on the nitty-gritties of the experiment. Here we used our 11-qubit trapped ion quantum computer. The native gates on this system are single qubit rotations and maximally entangling Molmar-Sorensen gates. The average fidelity of these gates, of the 2-qubit gates, is accessible to people over the cloud, is more than 96%. We tested 4 and 8 qubit versions of the algorithm, which had 12 and 32 qubit gates respectively. So now, before running an algorithm on a real quantum computer, we always have to think about the effect of noise. In this case, we used what's called a unary encoding, in which the number of qubits is equal to the dimension of the vector corresponding to each data point. The equation over here shows the form of the quantum state obtained at the end of the circuit execution. The algorithm requires the estimation of the coefficient of the first computational basis state in this superposition. However, due to noisy operations on a real quantum computer, the output will have finite probability to lie outside of the limited subspace shown over here. So what does this mean in practice? Well, the output from the quantum computer is a histogram of probabilities corresponding to the coefficients shown in the last slide. One can, of course, calculate A1 squared directly from this histogram. On the other hand, you could also post-process the histogram to discard states that we know lie outside the encoding subspace and calculate A1 after renormalizing the remaining probability distribution as shown over here. We will see that in the next slide that this second technique actually provides enormous increases in the accuracy of the algorithm. So first, here we show results from a first experiment where we artificially generated 4 and 8-dimensional data with 2 or 4 clusters. On the bottom over here, NC is the number of classes and NS is the number of shots. For each case, the blue bars on the left correspond to the results without error mitigation, and the red bars on the right correspond to the error mitigated result. For 2 classes, we see that for the case of 4-dimensional data, we achieve 100% accuracy, even with as little as 100 shots per circuit, and even with no error mitigation. For the case of 8-dimensional data in 2 classes, we also achieve 100% accuracy with 4 classes and reach accuracy of up to 90% for the 8-dimensional case with error mitigation. Now let's turn to a real-life data set. The IRIS data set consists of 3 classes of flowers with 50 samples from each of the 3 classes. Each data point has 4 dimensions that correspond to the length and the width of the sepals and the petals. This data set has been used extensively for benchmarking classification techniques in machine learning, in particular because classifying the set is not trivial. The classical nearest centroid algorithm shown by the dashed line over here reaches accuracies of around 93%, while our experiments with 500 shots and error mitigation reach 84% accuracy. The figure on the right compares the classification visually before and after error mitigation. Many of the points that lie close to midway between the centroids are originally misclassified, but applying the mitigation moves them to the right class. Now let's move on to the MNIST database, which contains image of handwritten digits and is widely used as a benchmark for classification algorithms. Each image is effectively a 784-dimensional point. In order to be able to work with this data set, we pre-process the images using principal component analysis in order to project them into 8 dimensions. We created subsets of this data set as shown here, consisting of samples of 0 or 1 or 2 or 7 and so on. You can see here that after error mitigation, the quantum computer matches the accuracy of the classical classifier for all the data sets tested. You should know that this is the first time classification with 4 or 10 classes has been performed on a quantum computer, and the accuracies we see here are quite remarkable. Finally, we'll discuss the robustness to noise that I mentioned earlier. Once we saw all the promising experimental results, we wanted to analyze how the accuracy of the algorithm would behave as we increase the number of qubits. We find that there are actually two kinds of error that affect the algorithm. The first is an error which redistributes the weights within the ideal density matrix and is resistant to our error mitigation technique. We were able to show that this error grows only as a log of the dimension of the data, which implies, for example, that if you want a desired accuracy of 10 to the power minus 2, the accuracies of the MS gate can be 10 to the power minus 3 rather than 10 to the power minus 5, which would have been the case if the error grew with the number of gates. Secondly, we also have a depolarizing error, which redistributes weight from an ideal density matrix to a completely mixed state. This is the error which our error mitigation technique addresses. We found a lower bound on the fidelity beyond which the error mitigation technique gets actually more effective as the dimension of the problem increases. Since this fidelity bound is easily satisfied by our systems, we don't need to worry about this error as we scale up. And then finally, for this part of the talk, I would like to leave you with my conclusions. We showed you how the quantum year centroid algorithm was successfully implemented on IonQ systems. It was used to classify data sets with up to 10 classes with remarkable accuracy. One of the key design choices that allowed this success was the choice of a sparse encoding technique that allows for effective error mitigation. We're confident that with the 99.9% fidelity of IonQ's newest 32 qubit system, we will be competitive with classical classifiers in even higher dimensional data sets. And of course, you can find the paper on arXiv. Okay, if there are no questions, let's move on to the tutorial part of the session. So yeah, today we are going to discuss machine learning notebook. Does everyone have access to this notebook? Okay, so you don't have to download. Okay, so if you go to this repository, over here, let's say, if I just go over here, so that's for the repository. You can just go and get all of the files in there. For the integration file, the file that's called the WHL file. If you just go to the address in the that Yonak provided, from there you should be able to download a copy of that as well. While you're doing that, I think while you're downloading the zip, I think we can get started for everybody else. So for everyone that was able to download the notebook, do you also have the provider in place? If you do, that's great. If you don't, please go ahead and follow the instructions that are given over here for installing the Qiskit IonQ provider, as well as any of the extra dependencies.
I just have a minor question. So when I import Qiskit, I always see depreciation warning. Is it only me or?
I'm not sure, but actually, thanks for letting me know. And I will talk to the people who wrote the integration. And it's possible that they updated the Qiskit after we've written the provider. So we'll fix that basically. So are people able to install the Qiskit provider using these instructions as well as get the notebook? I'm not sure where everyone is, but it looks like people are all at different stages. For those of you who already have the notebook and already have the who've been able to install the IonQ provider, go ahead and run the first cell of this notebook and see if you can import all the Python routines, as well as go ahead and run the second cell where you can test if you can import the Qiskit provider properly. Okay, awesome. Okay, so in this tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to do quantum circuit learning algorithm. So it's based on this paper that's given over here, Training of Quantum Circuits on a Hybrid Quantum Computer. And we are going to use a technique called a DDQCL, which is, it's just a term that they made up for this paper, but it's basically a hybrid quantum classical technique for generative modeling of classical data. And sorry, it's not using the Amazon Bracket SDK. In this case, we're using the Qiskit, but actually if you go on Amazon Bracket, you can do the same thing. But this one is using Qiskit. So there are a couple of problems with in the chat. One person says the token does not work. Okay, so if you're getting the no module named Qiskit IonQ provider, did you actually install the Qiskit IonQ? Did you do this? Okay, so I think what people are saying that they can fix it or they can handle it. Okay, so in this notebook, basically, we're going to do this circuit learning technique. And the training will occur by sampling the output of a parameterized circuit run on a quantum computer. And the circuit parameters will be updated using classical optimization techniques. And then convergence of the circuit parameters will produce a circuit that captures correlations on the training data. And thus, what will happen is when you run the circuit, you will produce samples from the data set itself. Basically, we are going to use this canonical data set called a bars and stripe data set. So it looks like here, looks like this one over here, right? Basically, you can have a rectangular lattice of points, and a bar and each point from the data set can consist of either bars, or it can consist of stripes, which are these vertical lines, or bars, which are these horizontal lines. And so the aim of the learning is to generate samples from either the bars or the stripes. So let's begin the tutorial. So can everyone import this third cell to access the IonQ, the two different IonQ backends? Okay, so for those of you who were able to do that, go ahead and execute the next cell as well. This is just setting some kind of random seed so that every time you run the algorithm, it's reproducible. Since this algorithm is quite, it has a lot of different parts. So we'll go over them one by one. The first thing you'll do is define a function which generates samples from the target probability distribution. So basically, we've defined a function that generates either bars or stripes. Looks like people were able to do that. I just want to wait here and ask, for those of you who are done with generating the BAS target distribution, let's move on to the next step. Here, we will define several functions which consist of parameterized circuits that help to explore the Hilbert space, and several entangling functions that can generate entanglement in the system. The complete circuit will consist of repeating layers of these drivers and entanglers. The parameters of the ansatz will be iteratively optimized by our hybrid quantum classical routine. Yes, thank you so much. I'll go ahead. Talking about generating, defining functions with which generate the ansatz for the learning circuit. So we define two kinds of ansatz. One is the driver and one is the entangler. They're two parts of the ansatz. And as you can see, so there's no hard and fast rule about what the driver should look like and what the entangler should look like. It's still, something people are doing research on. So over here, I've actually put in different kinds of entangling and driving circuits. So you can see that depending on what ansatz type you choose, you can have different options of the driver and the entangler. So I go, later on when you're experimenting, I encourage you to go ahead and play with those. I hope everybody was able to run this cell as well, which generates the ansatz. And then next, let's come to some routines that help you, that are also helpful for defining the ansatz. So I hope you were able to run both of those. So people were able to do that. Then let's go to the cost function. right? So whenever we do any kind of machine learning, we need a cost function. And in this case, our cost function is going to take the form of what's called a Kullback-Leibler divergence, which is basically measuring how close two probability distributions are to each other. The next thing, we will define a bunch of helper methods. So one of them is going to be a run iteration, where you run and return each iteration of the circuit. And then one of them is going to be run circuit and calculate the cost function, which both runs an iteration of the circuit and calculates a new cost function, effectively taking a training step. Okay, and so then so go ahead and run the cells that define these helper functions. For those of you who were attending our previous tutorial, handling the job submission and getting the result back is a bit more complicated in this case. So you can see, I'll go over the implementation of the run iteration in a bit of detail. So basically what you're doing in this function is you've defined a circuit in Qiskit, which has a certain number of qubits, and you're specifying also the number of shots. What you're going to do here is, so since this algorithm consists of submitting a bunch of circuits to the quantum computer, so it's a hybrid algorithm. So you submit a circuit to the quantum computer, get its result back, and then submit the next circuit. You need to ensure that every circuit that you submit does get the result back and does not error out. So therefore you have to check for, basically you have to write all of these conditions to handle all the different states of what a job can be in. Was everybody able to run this run iteration? So next, let's run the learning algorithm itself. We've defined all the different parts that we need to run it. First thing you need to do is choose the target device. So we have two devices on the IonQ backend. One is the IonQ simulator, and one is the IonQ actual quantum computer. One thing to be careful of is that since this algorithm is able to submit a lot of different circuits, one thing you need to be careful of is setting a maximum number of circuits. Otherwise, you can sort of let's say submit too many circuits, and I think Yonok will not be happy about that if you do that with your API key. If let's say you submit 1 million circuits, so just be careful about that, and always run it against the simulator first, at least for small system sizes, to make sure that everything you're doing makes sense. So go ahead and import go ahead and set the backend as just the IonQ simulator. Next, define the parameters of the problem for the training data. So in this case, let's just do the simplest thing. Let's set the number of rows to be 2, the number of columns to be 2. There's also this parameter called the connectivity of the entangler. So that's also a free parameter I put in there. So if you have higher connectivity of the entangler, you'll get 2 qubit gates between qubits that are further away from each other if you lay them out on a line. So basically, I'm just saying that there is this free parameter called the connectivity of the entangling circuit. And so if you lay the qubits out on a line and number them from 1 through n, the connectivity controls the 2 qubit gates that show up between the qubits, right? So if you have connectivity equal to 1, you'll only have 2 qubit gates between nearest neighbors. If you have connectivity 2, you'll have 2 qubit gates between next nearest neighbors. Connectivity 3 will be next to next nearest neighbors, and so on. So yeah, if you go ahead and execute this cell, you'll be able to set the problem up. Basically, what you're saying is that you want samples from this. You want to train a circuit that generates samples from this probability distribution. It produces samples from this data set, either a bar or a stripe. Also, in the next cell, you'll set up some of the training parameters. So you'll choose the number of layers of the circuit. So how many times you want to repeat the entangler and the driver, the number of shots, the type of ansatz, and whether you want a random initialization or some fixed initialization. So if you go ahead and run this cell, you'll be able to plot out what the circuit looks like. So I've given it over here, right? So just for 4 qubits, and I've used connectivity equal to 2. So there are 2 qubit gates between next nearest neighbors as well. And over here, it shows these angles in the RX gates as 0. And that is corresponding to the 0 initialization. So I've initialized all the angles to 0 basically. But during the course of the optimization, the angles of these RX gates will be the ones that are optimized. There's a question about, is it possible to make automatic installing Qiskit package, for example, conda install Qiskit? That's a Qiskit question. Yeah, I think somebody has the answer. Otherwise, if you can't figure it out, just let me know later. I'll ask one of the Qiskit people. Okay, thanks. There's some helpful comments. So one person is asking, where can I choose the simulator or the INQ real system? So over here, when you set the backend, right? When you say provider.get backend, that's where you set the simulator, the real system. Okay, so go ahead and then make sure that you have it set to simulator. Go ahead and run this next cell. And when you do that, you will have started running a hybrid quantum classical algorithm on the INQ system. So there's somebody saying that there's a lot of depreciation warnings. And so if you started running this cell, I don't think it will run immediately, in the sense that it will take some time to converge, right? Because you're sending a bunch of jobs to the INQ backend and then it's coming out. And so if you wait long enough, you will find that you will finally get the output, right? And it will give you I made it so that it prints out a bunch of information after terminating. And basically over here, it's plotting the cost function as a function of the number of iterations. And you can see that it goes down to very close to its minimum value. It will, I think if you're running it, it will take you a while to get through this, but you can already see the example from when I ran it. And you can see that the output probability distribution, once you optimize the parameters, gives you, from the simulator, gives you a perfect probability distribution. And then once you're done with that, you can also try it out on the QPU backend. And over here, I have set the maximum number of function evaluations to be no more than 200. So make sure you also set that bound. So when you run that, you'll get the convergence is going to look much noisier. And over here, I've also plotted, once you finish it, if you finish the optimization on the actual QPU backend, I've also plotted what the output probability distribution from there looks like. And you can see it's much noisier, but it does give the target states with a high probability. So I know this was really complicated, much more like a much bigger step up than the last one, in which we just made Bell states. But I hope people at least got a flavor of what it's like to run a hybrid algorithm on the INQ backend. So there's a question about the video and related codes. So the video will be made available to you by Yonok, and the codes I will post again the website. And there's one person who's saying it's taking a long time to try on the QPU. Is this normal? And so, yes, unfortunately, because I think many of you must be trying right now, right? And we have 2 quantum computers on the cloud. And since many of you are submitting jobs right now, they go into a queue. And so that's probably why you're seeing longer wait times right now. There are some other questions. One question was, I still don't get the bar graph means. Could you explain a bit more about it? So the bar graph is corresponding to the probability distribution output from the quantum circuit. Basically, our intent with the algorithm was to produce produce samples from either these bars or stripes, and we encoded those bars and stripes as these bit strings that are outlined over here. And so our goal was to train a quantum computer to generate a probability distribution that basically had equal weights on all of these four bit strings. If you look what we did here, we trained the probability distribution to produce those samples from exactly those bit strings with equal probability. Okay, so and then the follow-up question is what the equal state probabilities imply here. And that's just meaning that it produces those bit strings with equal probability. Then there's one more question about the cost function convergence. It is not as smooth as I expected. Is this relevant to noise or the mechanism of training? So the answer is both. So one is, of course, because of the noise, the training becomes, optimization landscape is not smooth anymore, but it basically, you can imagine that it becomes a bit blurry. And so that leads to less smoothness in the convergence. And then the other thing also is that related to the mechanism of training. So over here, I've chosen a stochastic optimizer, right? And that works better I found that that works better for quantum computing, for optimizing on a quantum computer, but it is also less smooth probably than the other kind of like normal gradient descent that you would use. And then one more thing. So I chose the number of shots to be 100. So if you increase the number of shots, you'll see that the optimizer typically becomes, it will become smoother, the convergence, but it will be more costly. Then there's also one question of, is this Jupyter notebook easily portable to other backends? For example, changing only the backend would be enough to run it on the IBM QPUs without any issue. I think the answer is yes. I've not tried it myself, but I don't see why not. Just one thing to keep in mind, IonQ system, we actually have all-to-all connectivity. So no matter what, even if you set this, I had this parameter here called the connectivity, where it went, but this one. Right. So even if you set this number to be a high number, it won't have any problem on the IonQ backend, but on the IBM backend, because they only have limited connectivity, it will lead to high overhead in the number of swap gates. Then there's one question about, do I need Ubuntu in my computer? I don't think you need that necessarily.
I'm curious about the method of running complicated algorithm with only 11 qubits.
In my paper. Okay, yeah. So basically for that, I assume you are asking about how we could classify, let's say, the MNIST data set since in the MNIST data set, each data point has 784 dimensions. How can we just do it with 11 qubits? And the answer is that we used a dimensional reduction techniques, like principal component analysis, to be able to do the experiment with just 11 qubits. Of course, as we increase the number of qubits, we need to apply less and less of those techniques. Then there is one question about, is this applicable for data formats from quantum image representation, such as FRQI or any QR? There's one question I'm not clear about the con parameter. Could you elaborate? So one thing you could just try to do is just change it, right? Go from 1 to 2 to 3 and see what changes in the circuit, and I think you'll get the idea of what it does. But basically, it's controlling the number of 2-qubit gates in the ansatz. And so exactly what it's doing is, can you guys see when I'm drawing?
Yes, I can see.
So let's say these were your qubits, right? If you had connectivity just 1, right? You would have 2 qubit gates between between just nearest neighbors. So this is basically, let me say, this is the connectivity parameter, right? I'm just trying to draw that, right? So if this was connectivity 1, I don't have a pen right now. If this was connectivity 1, this would be that, right? If connectivity was 2, and I made, right, I would have 2 qubit gates, not just between nearest neighbors like this. Sorry, this is really hard, but also between like this. Does that make sense? And then if connectivity was 3, I would connect to the next nearest neighbor. Then a couple of other questions. One person asked about what was your standard specifying the number of measurements and shots. So basically, I was trying to, I was in the simulator, I was trying to find a reasonable compromise between converging to a good value of the cost function versus the cost of running the circuit on the quantum computer, right? If I reduced the number of shots below 100, the convergence was not good. And if I increased it to, let's say, 500 or 1,000, the cost was too much. There is one question about, while using IonQ QPU, the cell has stopped and died out abruptly. Is it normal? No, I don't think the cell dying is normal. Yeah, I mean, if this happens just on our Slack channel, why don't you send me the error and I'll get it looked at. So if not, I guess I have a couple of housekeeping things for you, for Denise, for you and Yonak. One is, I guess that people will want to try out the notebook after we are done with the session. So how will the API key, should we just keep this API key for them for a while, or how should that work?
So I think the API key should be temporary, but if for practice, maybe we can leave the API key maybe 1 hour or 2 hour valid after the session ends. That's kind of temporary, but not real temporary. So after the session, the audiences can practice maybe 1 hour or 2 hours. We announce it, and then we can go on.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good. And so I'll ask Matt to arrange that. I think people wanted the video recording, so I guess you'll provide that, Yonak?
Okay, Sonika, what I just said is about the questionnaire and also about the API key. So I just told them that after this session ends, we will keep the API key valid maybe 1 or 2 hours so that they can practice a little bit more. And in case they want to use further the IonQ system, they should submit a proposal to the center so that we can just give them personal API keys. But for today's lesson, if it's allowed, then IonQ can allow maybe 1 hour, maybe 2 hours more after the session, right after the session, and then terminate the API key. Okay.
I said sounds good. I'll let Matt know. One more thing. There is one question about do we need API key even for the simulator backend? I will ask Matt if it is possible that we can just, because the simulator is free, right? And we want to encourage people to just develop programs and test it against the simulator, right? It may be possible for us to provide an API key that is just for the simulator, right? That does not allow you to access the hardware, but if you just want to play around with the simulator, does that sound like something that you would like? Yonak?
Yeah, one of the suggestion is that maybe you can just share if you can make a simulator only API key, then you can maybe share simulator only API key after the session for some hours so that they can access even the simulators with the free API key, not forever, but temporarily. but the
Right.
real system API key is a little bit tricky. So
Right,
let's
exactly.
think about it. Yep.
Right. Then there is one more question which says, can we add noise simulation from a real IonQ quantum computer, from a real IonQ computer like an IBM Q? So the answer for that is not yet. It is a feature that will be coming soon. Okay, if there are no other questions, I think should we wrap up the session?
Thank you, Sonika. Yeah, it's your turn, Dennis.
Oh, thank you everyone for joining us. I will see you again in 2 weeks and very much appreciate your time, and feel free to send us email or Slack messages with any questions.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Okay.